So I'm going to do that now. And so without any further ado, I'd like to give the time to Dr. Scotty Baker.
Good evening. Welcome to Archaeology of the Exodus. I am L.S. Baker Jr., and thank you for inviting me to be here. This is going to be a fun week for us. We get a chance, at least it's fun for me. I enjoy Egypt, obviously, and so I get a chance to share a little bit of my passion with you, and especially how it connects and intersects with the Bible. Tonight, we're going to be exploring the question, did Israel build the pyramids? And to answer that question, we have to discover when the Hebrews were actually in Egypt. And so that'll be basically our topic tonight. I like to start off with a quote. This is actually from the pyramid texts. It says, any gods who shall cause this pyramid and this construction of the king to be good and sturdy, it is they who will be vital. It is they who will be respected. It is they who will be impressive. It is they who will be in control. It is they who will take possession of the crown. The pyramids were not just a side thing that maybe the kings did on their own. This was something that everybody participated in, and it was a central focus of the afterlife, not just for the king, but for those associated with the king, which was everybody in Egypt. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the construction as we go through. So to start off with, I thought maybe we should start with maybe a little bit of a historical overview to understand when the pyramids were built. And we'll start with a place I think everybody understands, and that's Alexander the Great. Most everyone has heard of Alexander the Great. Of course, he conquered much of the known world at the time. And when he died, of course, he didn't have a son. He divided his kingdom into the four generals. Most of us would know that already. Ptolemy, the first Ptolemy, whose name was Soter, he went down to Egypt, and he took control of Egypt. On the I guess pointer here is a bust of his face made by the Egyptians, and here's a bust of his face made by the Greeks. And so you can see that there's a little bit of an artistic difference. I don't know which one is more handsome. I'm pretty sure it's not this one, but however he looked, that's those are two different ways he looked. It was either him or it was his son. We're not really sure which it was. His son was the second Ptolemy. Here's, by the way, a picture of him, a Roman sculpture, contemporary sculpture, but from Rome. Here's the Egyptian bust of his face, a little bit different look. And here's his face on a Greek coin. So you kind of get a little bit of an idea. There's a little bit of a difference in how he was portrayed. But it was either him or his father, one of the two. Scholars differ on it, that built the Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria was intended to be this, I guess, archive of all the known wisdom in the world, all the known knowledge in the world. And so they would collect all these Greek texts and put them in this fantastic library. They're scrolls, so they were probably stored very much like you see back here, like maybe like a wine cellar kind of an idea, where they would kind of sit together, and that's how they stored the scrolls. The Greeks themselves, they're in Alexandria, they were a little bit of scoundrels, because what they would do is they wanted the Greek text. So whenever a ship would dock in the port of Alexandria, they would go on board and they would confiscate any text they could find. They would, if it was written in a different language, they would translate it and they would give the original back. If it was written in Greek, they would copy it and they would give the copy back, and they would keep the original for the library. But anyway, it was during this time that they also wanted to translate the Hebrew scriptures. And so the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek. We call that the Septuagint, or the LXX, that just the Roman numerals for the supposedly 70 scholars who worked on the translation. And that's where the Septuagint came from at this time. Well, also at this time, they wanted to have a history of Egypt written down. And so they asked a priest named Manetho. There was an Egyptian priest named Manetho to write a chronology of Egypt. And this isn't Manetho here in this picture. This is just a priest. You get an idea of what the priest looked like about that time. But they asked him to write the history of Egypt. And so he's the one who actually divided Egypt into what we now call dynasties. And so we get that idea of dynasties from him and the different eras in Egypt. So let me go through this with you and kind of show you the history of Egypt with these dynasties that Manetho made. To start off with, there's basically 3 periods of time in Egypt where there was only one king, and the king ruled the entire country, entire region of Egypt. The oldest of these was called, what we call it today, we call it the Old Kingdom. The newest of these we call the New Kingdom, and the one in the middle we call the Middle Kingdom, because Egyptologists aren't very, too complicated. It's pretty simple. So the old, the middle, and the new, and those are times of unification with one king. The periods in between or just after these are called intermediate periods. These are the periods in between, the intermediate periods, and these are times where there are multiple kings ruling at the same time, and so there's a little bit of chaos as far as the administration goes and that sort of thing. Before the Old Kingdom was an early period, and after the third intermediate period was a late period. So early and late, that's pretty easy to remember. And then the pre-dynastic, before the dynasties began, and then after the late period is the period of the Ptolemies, when Ptolemies made the Library of Alexandria and had the Manetho write the history, and then the Roman era followed that, which of course included the time of Jesus and onward. The pre-dynastic period, I don't want us to get the idea that the pre-dynastic period was a time of rudimentary art. You can actually see the art. The artwork is very well done. In fact, you'll see here on the Narmer palette, this is actually a palette that they would use for probably the eye makeup, the kohl. They would actually put this probably right here, and they'd put on their face. But this was actually a ceremonial one, and it was made to kind of show the unification of the 2 parts of Egypt. And so, kind of the bringing together the first king did that. His name is Narmer. I don't know if you can see this right here, but it's a catfish, and then this symbol, chisel symbol. It actually means, it's the name Narmer. That's how it says name Narmer, and actually means angry catfish. That's what his name meant. And you can see on this side of the plate, it's the same plate, just the front and back of it. This is the front side. This is here's this kind of bowling pin looking crown. We'll talk about that more tomorrow night. It's a white crown, and it's the white crown of you kind of see them. He's conquering here the Marsh people. So he's from the Nile Valley, and he's gone down to gone north, but gone down to the Delta region to destroy them. And over here, he's wearing the red crown. Now he is the king there, and so he's killed his enemies and he's unified Egypt. He is, by the way, the strong bull who overthrew the city and trampled his enemies. That's basically the palette. It's kind of celebrating his greatness. But you can also see in the eyes of this young lady over here, these 2 blue stones. This is lapis lazuli. This is the very earliest period of Egyptian history that we know of. And these blue stones, lapis lazuli, only were found at that time in Afghanistan. So if you can picture in your mind, I probably should have put a map. If you can picture in your mind how far it is to go from Egypt all the way to Afghanistan to get these blue stones, you can understand that they weren't primitive people. They had a wide, vast network of trade that we're only now beginning to understand. It's quite remarkable. Following that, the first 2 dynasties of Narmer combined these 2 lands and kind of all these disassociated peoples into one people. The first dynasty began, and that it's the early dynastic period. It's first and second dynasty. Kings were buried in tombs like this. They were kind of long kind of tombs, flat tombs. They were buried with their queens and different people. Later on, as they died, they were put there. There's no evidence really of Egypt. I'm not aware of any evidence that Egyptian rulers killed anybody when they died to be buried with them. They were buried with them, but they were buried with them later when they actually died. It wasn't killed at the same time. There doesn't seem to be evidence for that. That's the early dynastic period, just 2 dynasties. And then we get into the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom it was the beginning of the height of Egyptian power. This is when most of those pyramids were built. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but the big pyramids at Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, that's the time of the Sphinx. The king was very, very powerful at that time. It's likely a time just after the Tower of Babel, if we're trying to think from a biblical perspective on that. The first intermediate period came after that. We'll go back to the pyramids in a minute, but this is a time, it wasn't really a time of chaos, although it was written like that. There still was art. There still was like iconography and stelae and nice jewelry and things. There's some scrolls that were written. So there's writing and literacy at the time. It wasn't a dark age by any stretch of the imagination, although it's oftentimes referred to as the dark age of Egypt. It's only called dark age because we don't have a whole lot of information. What we do have seems to be just two competing centers of power, one at the Fayum in the north and one down at Thebes. Eventually, Thebes took over. This went actually from Dynasty 7 through the first part of Dynasty 11. These dynasties are just families, different families that took over one after the other. It didn't last, it probably lasted 25 years. It didn't last very long. There's many kings ruling multiple parts of Egypt at the same time. So there's a lot of dynasties in a short period of time. Eventually, in the 11th dynasty, the tail end of that, it was a unification. One king was able to get control over all this. He ruled at the Fayum area. He was able to control most of Egypt and ruled from that Fayum area. This is a time of great art. You'll find most of the wooden models are buried with kings and different nobility. These wooden models, they're some of my favorite things about Egypt because we actually can see the Egyptians in 3 dimensions. So, for example, you see these two fellows here giving each other a hug. You see this, what they're wearing here. It's kind of hard to tell what they're wearing, but you can look over here at the model and really get a good idea of what it looked like. And so these wooden models are just really fantastic by giving us an idea of how they actually appeared. These are Nubian soldiers from the south that have come up, mercenaries, and they're going to fight for the Egyptians. Here's a woman carrying some bird that she's caught. She's going to pick it back with some food to make food for her family. She's wearing a beautiful dress here. And so you kind of get an idea. The Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom was a time when a lot of the local rulers ruled, kind of like our, if you were to say governors, maybe even our county mayors. I don't know what they call it, county chiefs, but they were the ones maybe more in control, have more power than any other time in Egyptian history. So the king was always trying to fight to get this time. If we're thinking about biblical chronology, this is probably the time of Abraham. That Abraham came here. Some of our colleagues in the Adventist world suggest maybe Joseph came at this period. I put Joseph in the next period after this, in the second intermediate period. And I'll tell you more about that on another night. But the second intermediate period was a time when Asiatic rulers, people from the Palestine area, the southern Levant, came in with their horses, their chariots, compound bows, battle axes, and they were actually able to gain control of the upper portion, the delta portion of Egypt, and eventually at one time even actually gain control of all of Egypt. Again, although they were foreigners, and there's the Egyptians were ruling in the south, and these Asiatic people were ruling in the north. This was still a time when there was beautiful art. Look at this golden crown here, golden flies of valor. Here's a battle axe, and it's a vase, beautiful vase. I'm trying to show you that the artistic culture in Egypt never really dropped off, even with these intermediate periods. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk a lot more about this period right here and about the two warring factions, because the Hebrews were definitely in Egypt somewhere in this time period. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. The New Kingdom, this is the time period of the Exodus. This is the time period most people put the Exodus. We'll talk about that more in a minute, why that is. These are dynasties 18 to 20. This is the time of Tutankhamen, Ramses the Great, Akhenaten, heretic king, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, Thutmose, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, Amenhotep. There's a lot of famous names. They all came from this New Kingdom. This was the golden age, I guess you could even say, maybe the height of all of Egypt was the New Kingdom. The extent of Egypt went all the way up to the Euphrates, and went way down south into Sudan, quite a ways. They controlled a lot of the ancient world at that time during this period. We'll come back to this period more. Following it, in the 21st dynasty, there was a drop off again. And this is an intermediate period where there was multiple kings again. This is the time when Siamon was ruling. He ruled in the 21st dynasty. It was probably his daughter who married Solomon. And then in I think it's the 22nd dynasty, it's the time of Shishak, who came, and he was actually, Jeroboam ran away from Solomon, came to Shishak. Shishak was not an Egyptian. A lot of foreign rulers ruled at this time. And Shishak took him in, and then later on went and raided the temple in Jerusalem under Rehoboam. Later on, during this period, towards the end of this period, Taharkan Taharqa also invaded. There's a short period that's in 2 Kings 19:9 during this time period. Following the third intermediate period was, of course, you also look, the art is beautiful here as well. It was the late period. This is the time of Pharaoh Necho, the Babylonians. That's the time of Daniel, this time period here. Again, you can see beautiful artwork, unification for a short period. The priests were kind of very much in control at this time. And then following this time period was the Ptolemaic period, when the Greeks came. Alexander the Great, and then, of course, the Ptolemies. And it's the time of the Rosetta Stone, time of Cleopatra, and some of the things that we're used to talking about. Following the Ptolemaic, of course, Cleopatra and Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, and how that all went down. It's a very famous ending to this period. Of course, the Roman period began, and the Roman period art in Egypt is very much Roman. Egyptian art now has kind of changed a lot. It's different. And it was during the Roman period that Josephus lived. Josephus was a Jew who lived in Palestine area, and he's the one in his Antiquities of the Jews. By the way, that's a bust of him there, and then an etching of him at a later period. So the bust is probably more likely looking like him. But Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews, he's the one who suggested that the Hebrews built the pyramids. He wrote, "Then they," meaning the Egyptians, "set them," meaning the Hebrews, "also to build the pyramids." And so we're going to be testing Josephus's idea tonight as we explore who built the pyramids and were the Hebrews involved in that, as Josephus suggested. So what do we know about the pyramid builders? Well, let's go to the time of Napoleon. Let's go ahead in time to the late 1700s, 1798. Napoleon led his army to battle. They're trying to gain control of Egypt. And while he was there, he brought along a lot of scholars. And these scholars told all the soldiers, as you go throughout the country and you do different things, look for writing. And so at one point, they found the Rosetta Stone. You can see it there in the bottom part of the picture. On the next slide, we'll actually have a bigger picture of it. They're used actually as a stone in the fort, and they actually were able to rescue it and bring it back. And of course, that was very instrumental in deciphering the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. The Sphinx at this time was also buried as a nice painting of that time period of Napoleon there. Well, the Rosetta Stone itself, which now is in the British Museum, has three lines of writing, two languages, three scripts. The top and the middle are both Egyptian, and the bottom is Greek. The top is written in hieroglyphs. The middle is written in Demotic, and that's kind of like a shorthand cursive. And the Greek, the Koine Greek, is the same Greek that the New Testament was written in. And so right away, the scholars we could read Koine Greek forever. So right away, the scholars could read, and they knew what this was. This was it was a stele made by the priests during the fifth Ptolemy, Ptolemy the fifth, thanking him. I think he was 12 years old when he took over the throne, and so they were thanking him for forgiving all their taxes and for even waiving some of the debt that they had. I would do the same. If someone were to come and say you don't have to pay taxes and forgive all the debt you have, that would be wonderful. I'll make a stele to them. Well, they made a stele to him. They're thanking him for that, and they put these stele. There's a number of them, I think a dozen or so, all over Egypt. This is the only one that we have still that we found, and so it wasn't long after the Rosetta Stone was discovered that Demotic was the shorthand. It was kind of the language of the common people during the Ptolemaic period, and that was deciphered relatively soon after the Rosetta Stone. It was right close to the same time period. And so right when they were able to decipher the Demotic, they realized that this said the same thing the Greek said. And since the Demotic and the Greek said the same thing, had the same message in two different languages, one Egyptian, one Greek, but it's two different languages, they realized the hieroglyphs also said the same thing. And that's why it was useful in deciphering. And so, of course, very famously, Jean-Francois Champollion was able to eventually decipher hieroglyphs, and it's been a long process. And I'm glad he did. I actually get a chance to work on hieroglyphs. I work at Karnak. I'll show you some pictures another night. But I get a chance to work at Karnak working on hieroglyphs, translating those almost every December, many Decembers anyway. they get a chance to do that, I'm very happy to do it. Well, the reason why the Rosetta Stone is important, it's also important for another reason. And during any period of time in ancient Egyptian history, there was at least the potential for 4 language stages all at the same time. What I mean by a language stage is, yeah, you know how when we read the King James version with the these and the thous, it's a little bit more difficult to read than maybe New King James. Just for an example, we can still read it, but it's a little difficult. But if we were to go back to the time when the King James was first translated, that old English, it'd be very difficult to understand different languages. But during our time period, if someone was able to write like Shakespeare or something like that, certainly someone could write like Shakespeare right now. It'd just be a different language stage. The language has different stages. Today, our kids are saying words that I don't even understand what they're talking about. So they're entering into a new language stage. But that's what we're talking about. So at any time in ancient Egypt, there's different language stages. So if you want to track on this chart with me, this is the Old Kingdom. OK is Old Kingdom. First intermediate period, Middle Kingdom. We just went through these. Second intermediate period. This is the New Kingdom here. There's three dynasties. This is I've expanded it because a lot of changes happened during this time. The third intermediate period, late period, Ptolemaic and Roman. Since the Rosetta Stone was found during the Ptolemaic period, we are looking at this column right here where this red arrow is. The oldest language stage in use was always relating to theology. So if you look, for example, in the early 18th dynasty, you'll see that classical Middle Egyptian was still being used for theological texts. Late Middle Egyptian was being used for official communication of the state. That's writing the administration type text, and then literature like poems or different mythologies or different things that people read for entertainment. That was also written in a later Middle Egyptian. And then the late Egyptian, the day-to-day language was a completely different language. The late Egyptian was double entendres. They were using play on words, a lot of puns, and they loved this kind of multiple meanings of language. So the spoken language was the newest language. Then the literature followed by the administrative texts, and the last was the religious texts. So if we look at the Rosetta Stone with this yellow box represents the Rosetta Stone because it's official communication. Remember, the priest wrote this as official communication dealing with not with theology, and that would put it here, but dealing with actual forgiving of taxes and that kind of thing. And that's why it has Middle Egyptian, Neo-Middle Egyptian language for the hieroglyphs and the Demotic, and then the Greek text was the newest language that was being written. Of course, it was Greek official communications. That's why it has the Greek at the bottom of it. And that's why it uses the Greek script here at the bottom, the Greek script, the Demotic script, and the hieroglyphic script. Those are why this one here. This is why those three were used on the text. All right, let's get an idea. So this discovery of Egypt kind of led to what we called Egyptomania. This is when people got really excited about Egypt because the French came back with all this information. Other scholars from Europe started coming into Egypt. Some had been coming before, but now it really started to gain. Howard Carter found Tutankhamun's tomb, and in 1922, I think it was, and it got everybody really excited. They were finding. They were advertising mummy unwrappings, and people would gather and they'd watch mummies being unwrapped. That was very entertaining, apparently. They were actually even grinding up mummies and using it for medicine. It's just awful stuff. But anyway, they were very crazy about Egypt at that time. But it also led to our knowledge, and a search kind of archaeology kind of began at that time, and we started to figure out what existed in Egypt. The pyramids were easier to see than some of the other ones, the temples as well. And we realized that really, if you look at this map of Egypt, this is the delta up here, and this is the long, narrow Nile Valley going all the way down to Aswan and then down into Sudan area, Nubia. Where this box 1 is right here, that's where the Giza pyramids are, and Saqqara, Dashur, those old kingdom pyramids. The middle kingdom pyramids were built here in box 2. Down here by Thebes in the New Kingdom, there were also a few pyramid type things. I'll show you pictures of in a minute. And then later on, during the late period, even down in Nubia, there was some pyramid type shapes. I'll show you I'll show you pictures of all of them. Let's go through them one by one. Here on your screen is a line drawing of all the royal pyramids in Egypt from all these different periods of time. All of them are there. We have a lot of Queen's pyramids, some smaller ones that aren't here. These are all the royal kings' pyramids. And I don't expect you to read this, but I just wanted you to get the idea of sizes and also to kind of get an idea of not that many of them. Here's the big ones at Giza right here. So here's Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure is here. So you kind of get an idea of some of the bigger ones, the bent pyramid, the step pyramid. I'm going to show you inside the step pyramid here in a second, and some of the ones that came later on. So let me just show you, go through them with you. The very first, what we would call a pyramid, is the step pyramid. It was built by Djoser at Saqqara. It's this kind of step pyramid right here. You kind of see where the step pyramid is, and they kind of all built close around. So here's the step pyramid, and these other pyramids all kind of built close by. They wanted to kind of get close to him, and I'll show you into some of those. You can actually see really step pyramid here, how the sand of the desert really is it's really clear line between those fertile lands and the desert lands, and we'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow night, and also another. I'm gonna take you in. This actually is the step pyramid. We kind of enter down over here where the arrow is, and this is me inside this hallway. I'm gonna push play here so you can get a chance to kind of hopefully kind of walk it yourself and kind of see it with me. This was a reconstruction. The pillars you see, they're all ancient. The floor is a modern floor, and as we kind of walk through this south entrance, as we get close, we get to the burial chamber, right around this, right around here. Get a chance sometime to visit Saqqara. You'll get a chance to come inside. You can actually pay a little bit of money and go actually down into the actual maze of it, and end up into the sarcophagus area, the burial chamber, which is what we're getting to right now. And we're going to look down into the burial chamber down below. Isn't that amazing? So you actually can walk down in there and actually come out 4 different, it's a maze actually down there. And so come out and hopefully find your way. They actually built a false entrance here. There's another false entrance down here that's been bricked up. These are for robbers. There's another one over here with the idea that maybe they would get lost and they would fall, and that was kind of their deterrent. Hopefully they wouldn't survive. I'm gonna take you here. So as you look down into this is actually 5 stories down. We're 5 stories up. This actually is 26th dynasty reconstruction work. So that the wood that you see right here is during the late period. This wood was put here while Daniel was in Babylon. This was being put in this. You're looking at wood for the time of Daniel, actually. So while Daniel was in Babylon, someone in Egypt was coming here and restoring this. You actually can see here in the ceiling these little dots, little circles. Those are actually bolts, modern bolts, really long bolts that they had to stick in there to kind of keep the roof from collapsing, the ceiling from collapsing, so that we as visitors can now go inside it and look at it. Other step pyramids, there are a few others. Most of them are ruins, and you kind of can see them here. Also from the 3rd dynasty. Also from the beginning of the 4th dynasty, Snefru at Dashur, a little bit to the south, built 3 pyramids. The oldest one here is at this one is kind of fallen down. You still see the core of it, but most of it's collapsed around it. Then he built the bent pyramid. The idea that we think is that at the time they were trying to build it on this angle, but it started to crack, and so they changed the angle. There are a few other modern theories now that challenge that interpretation, but that's been the longest running interpretation. And then you can see the bent pyramid back here. He built another one called the Red Pyramid. That's one of my favorite pyramids because it was a pyramid I went in that I didn't know what it looked like inside. And so I was the only one in there. And so I felt like I was an early explorer, kind of romance of it. It's kind of fun. You have to walk up the side here and then kind of go down inside. And it was kind of fun. I enjoyed that one. So those were all built by Snefru. His son was Khufu, who built a large grand pyramid here at Giza. Saqqara is down here, and Dashur is a little further down. And so here's the big 3 at Giza. And I want to show you here Khufu's. This is Khufu's pyramid, and this is how big the stones are. They're different sizes, but you got to get an idea. My wingspan is about 6 feet. So that's a little bit bigger than 6 feet long. There are different lengths, but they're all the same equal heights. And we know from the Red Sea, not Dead Sea, but Red Sea scrolls that were just found recently, how they kind of built these pyramids. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you can see that most of the outer layers have been taken, the white limestone casings that looked really nice and white. Let me go back one slide so you can see. There's an artistic drawing of it, but you can see they used to be white. The outsides of them used to be white. All that white limestone was taken off and reused. Here's some of it still in the ground on in front of it. That white limestone was reused to build the mosque of Muhammad Ali, not the boxer, but the Pasha, his mosque there in Cairo. And so a lot of that was robbed out at that time. But you can see the interlocking of the stones. You see how this is? So you can't just pull the stones out. They're interlocked like Tetris blocks. And so it's very, very interesting how it is quite a lot of them. You see this pavement out in front of it. Well, if you let me go back, sorry, back one. As you go up in, we actually don't go into the entrance to the pyramid. We go in through a cutting. This actually was cut by another Muslim team that wanted to, this is during the 1500s, or wanted to come in and get past these blocking stones. So I'm going to point with my arrow, but you see that here the burial chamber is right here. Number 5, number 6 is the burial chamber. Number 4 is the grand gallery. And you see this kind of a lower kind of track here, and then it goes right into this tunnel here going down. That tunnel system right here is actually this tunnel system over here. And you can't see it now, but you'll see it maybe a little bit later. There's some granite blocking stones. So when they finished and buried the king, they released those stones and they all came and they blocked the entrance all the way down to here. And so what they had to do to get around the granite blocks, because limestone is easier to cut through, is they dug this tunnel to go in around. They didn't quite make it, so they had to do like another little jog to get up into it. They found their way around it. So that's where visitors today enter the pyramid. And then you go up this long shaft going up all the way up as far as you can see to get up to the grand gallery. And then we get to the top of the grand gallery. At the top of the stairs, you can now see you go all the way up the grand gallery, and the burial chamber is way up at the top here. If you go through here, it's called the Queen's burial chamber. It wasn't actually for the Queen. It's probably for the Ka image of the life force image of Khufu. His image was put back in there underneath him. And you can see now this is actually on top here, looking back down to where I'm standing here, which would be down below here. So you gotta get an idea of how big that is. And then when you get to the top, you have to go through this little chamber here. They actually had these, you can see where the ropes actually were hanging down here to kind of release these stones that would slide in and kind of cut off the burial chamber. So one more last line of defense. So you have to kind of crawl through that to get into the burial chamber. But once you get to the burial chamber, oops, I went too far, sorry. You come out this little crawl space here, and you enter the burial chamber. This is all granite. And I just want to point out one more time, this is the Old Kingdom. Look at this. This is granite. Granite is super hard. Look how thin and how straight these lines are. These aren't primitive people. These are very intelligent, very skilled artisans to craft and to be able to move granite all the way from Aswan, all the way up, this pink granite, all the way up here to Giza, and then be able to carve granite that precisely is really amazing. It baffles everyone who looks at it. So obviously the early people were not as primitive as sometimes we suggest. There's also these air shafts. We don't know where they end. We have them going all the way out, but we don't know that they go all the way out. And this is kind of what they look like here. There's been some robots through the years that have gone through those and found blocking stones. They've drilled through the blocking stones and looked at there's another blocking stone. So we still don't know quite where those air shafts go to. There has been some work on looking at the voids in the pyramid, and there's some voids here in the pyramid. So maybe someday there's a chance that we might get a chance to drill into them and see them. In the meantime, it may just be sand. They use sand kind of to fill some spaces. So it may not even be empty chambers at all. We don't know yet. But anyway, this is Khufu's pyramid. There's other 4th dynasty pyramids as well at Abu Rosh up ahead. And then the fifth dynasty pyramids got quite a bit smaller. You kind of can see them here. They're a little bit smaller. and they've kind of crumbled. Most of them have crumbled because the outer casings have been reused, and the interior bricks have kind of fallen down. Sixth dynasty pyramids is the last of the dynasties of the Old Kingdom. Not very many pyramids. And then, but the fifth dynasty is very important because the fifth dynasty is where we actually get, I don't know if we have a video, we do, get the pyramid texts. So now everybody probably has heard of the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead is spells that were copied from Middle Kingdom coffin texts. So the coffin texts became the New Kingdom Book of the Dead. Well, the coffin texts themselves were copied from pyramid texts. Pyramid hieroglyphs were not written on pyramids until the fifth dynasty. And this is the very, very first of them right here. You can see Unis's pyramid. And I'm taking you through it, kind of can see this is looking kind of back out as you come in the entrance through this way. And then we're in this little antechamber right now. My team was standing there with me from Lipscomb University. We're the ones working at Karnak. Now we're going to go into the burial chamber of Unis's pyramid. And we get a chance to kind of look around a little bit. The local fellow is there with his flashlight, being very helpful, hoping to get tips. But you kind of can see the artistic work that's been done, stars that form the ceiling as the realm of the gods, and different spells. There's the leader of our team, Mark Jansen, and we're looking at some of the pyramid text there. Okay, well, the Old Kingdom ended, the first intermediate period began, and here are the pyramids of the first intermediate period. You see people standing next to them. They're very, very small. They're not as big anymore. And then the Middle Kingdom pyramids, during this, like in the height of kind of unification, they got to be big again. These are built down at the Fayum. They were built, of course, a lot of mud brick in the center of them, and they crumbled when the outer casings have been taken away. Very big pyramids there in the Middle Kingdom. The New Kingdom pyramids aren't much of pyramids. They're just pyramid kind of facings of tombs that kind of dug into stone. So, and these are pyramid shapes that are used as fronts to nobles' tombs, not to kings' tombs. The kings in the New Kingdom were built in the Valley of the Kings. I mean, their tombs are built in the Valley of the Kings, and we'll be exploring that another night. Nubian kings in the late period, they also had some pyramids. Their pyramids are a little bit more shaped. This is the time of the Babylonians. If you kind of keep track in your head where we're at, they're very much to the south, and they're a different shape. Actually, we have a team from Lipscomb University. It's also digging close by these pyramids. National Geographic recently has had specials on this because the water table, because of the Aswan Dam, has raised the water table in Nubia to such an extent that now the pyramids themselves, the subterranean chambers, are actually flooded. So as absurd as it sounds, if you want to explore the chambers of the pyramids out in the middle of the desert, you have to use scuba gear to do that. Because National Geographic has been doing this. If you want to see some good specials on that, you'll see they actually found gold, by the way, in one of these tombs. Did Israel build the pyramids? So all these pyramids you've seen. Our question tonight, did they build them? Well, that really depends on when the Hebrews were in Egypt. So let's shift now to the Bible and find when the date of the Exodus was according to the Bible. So when we do that, it's quite common to start in 1 Kings 6:1. 1 Kings 6:1 says, and it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, that's going to be important, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. I emphasize those because I want you to know that when we look at the 4th year of Solomon, we know when that 4th year was. We know that it spanned 2 of what we call years, 967, 966, with most of it being 966. But the 2nd month, the month that's called Ziv, was actually in 967. So 967. So if we go back to 1 Kings 6:1, and we want to look and see when was 480 years before that. We're going in BC time. We have to add time to go backwards, and so we add 480 years to 967. Very basic arithmetic, come up with 1447 as the date of the Exodus. Most of our Adventist scholars there's some variations of understanding. We have some other colleagues in other denominations that also use this as a date of the Exodus. Anywhere from 1452 to 1445 is reasonable room for movement there. But we're going to use in this seminar this week the date 1447 because it's the basic arithmetic date. The date that I also use is 1447, and that's what we're going to use for that. However, my team from Lipscomb University, the Baptists, they actually believe the Exodus took place during the time of Ramses. There's a time later in the 19th dynasty. And so that's a bit of a problem. This text is a bit of a problem because the 480 years clearly is in 1447, which is an early 18th dynasty. But if it's going to be the time of Ramses, that's going to be 19th dynasty. And so the way they explain it is they say that this 480 years, because 80 is a very rounded, it's obviously a rounded number, and maybe it could be symbolic of 12 40-year periods, 40 being a basic idea of generations, since Moses had three 40-year periods. And that's where they kind of get that idea. And at 40 times 12, just it comes up with 480. It's not very reliable. Therefore, they're saying, that 480 years is probably not a reliable number. The reason why they'll say that and they really believe it is because they don't believe that the numbers were treated the same way by the ancient people that the way we use them. And so what they'll come up with was a date 1267 BC for the Exodus, or somewhere around there. And likely the number, probably about 300 years. And that's for a certain reason. We'll get into, I think it's Tuesday night, I think we do Who's the Pharaoh of the Exodus. We'll come back to that topic there, a little bit more on that. But I just wanted to explain to you why I don't agree with them. I understand them, and they're very smart people, and they love the Bible very much. But I don't agree with them because I see very much evidence that that text, 1 Kings 6, verse 1, said it was the 4th year of Solomon. It didn't say around his 5th year. It said his 4th year. So 4th year is not a rounded number. It also said his 2nd month. So it's being very, very precise. So I think the number 480, I think, is a very precise number. In fact, I believe that it's very reasonable to understand 480 years. Yes, it's going to be a rounded number, but 480 years is as much a literal number as it is a rounded number. And I believe that Solomon may have waited to make sure it was a full 480 years before he started building in his 4th year. He could have started earlier, but he didn't. He waited until his 4th year to have that number. So anyway, that's my interpretation of it. So for this, but don't forget 1267 is an important date to keep in your head, or that thereabouts, just so you understand when you're reading other scholars' work. In this seminar, I'm going to say 1447 as the date when they left Egypt, but it could have been 200 years later. So just keep that in your head. So when did they come into Egypt? So that's when they left. When did they come in? They obviously didn't build pyramids in the New Kingdom. So did they build the pyramids earlier? Did they come during the time when the pyramids were built? So that depends on the question of the length of the sojourn. How long were they actually in Egypt? So we go to Exodus 12:40. And the Masoretic text, if you would open up your New King James Bible, which is the text I have up on the screen, it says, now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. So they lived in Egypt 430 years. So you can just do simple math and find out when they came into Egypt. That's the Masoretic text. But if you look in the margin of your Bible, the New King James has this in there, and I'm sure other translations do as well. It points out that the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint, remember the Septuagint was written during the time of the Ptolemies for the Library of Alexandria. The Septuagint has Egypt and Canaan was 430 years. So at least there's a manuscript tradition that's older than the Masoretic text. Now, I would tell you, if you would ask me, which is more trustworthy, the Masoretic text or the Septuagint, I would say the Masoretic text almost every time, except there are a few occasions, especially dealing with numbers sometimes the Septuagint numbers are just crazy bad. But every once in a while, there's something there that's very useful. And this might be one of those cases. And so I think we should consider it as a possibility. So we have two possibilities. They were either in Egypt for 430 years, or they were in Egypt and Canaan for 430 years. And that difference is going to make a lot of difference for when they came into Egypt. So let's look at those two possibilities so that you understand them when you're reading different scholars, particularly Adventist scholars' work, but there's a few others as well. So the Egypt only or the Egypt and Canaan variant, either one of them, the math is math. They both end up in 1877. The difference isn't the math. The difference is the event associated with 1877. So Egypt only, 1877 would be when they came into Egypt. When Jacob and his family came into Egypt, that would be the date. Egypt and Canaan, 1877 would be Abraham's sojourn when he left Ur. That would be when that began. So what biblical support do we have for both of these two views? For the Egypt only, the Masoretic text The interpretation goes back really to Genesis 15:13. So this is Exodus 12:40, Egypt only. There's two texts that seem to suggest that Egypt only is correct. The first one is Genesis 15:13. It says, this is when God is having the covenant with Abram. And he has the animals cut in half, and he passes through the middle. And this is that time period, at that event. Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. Okay, that sounds like a long time. Well, so maybe 400 years is a rounded form of the 430. That's how you would understand it. So, and the affliction, by the way, Stephen, talking before the Sanhedrin, he also says the affliction would lasted 400 years. And so maybe this affliction for 400 years is maybe that's the rounded form of 430. That's the interpretation for Egypt only. Egypt and Canaan. So taking Exodus 12:40 as Egypt and Canaan, like the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch do. We would look at Galatians. Paul was writing in Galatians 3:16 and 17, and he wrote, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And this I say, that the law, which is 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant. Now, Paul is not talking, he's not trying to recount the Exodus. He's not telling the story. He's just talking matter-of-factly. He's saying that Abraham, a promise was made 430 years before the law was given at Mount Sinai, which took place 2 months after the Exodus. So we know that Paul is talking about 430 years as being in Egypt and Canaan. So that's a problem. What is Paul quoting? Maybe, well, he's not quoting, but is he referencing a citing, maybe the Septuagint, or maybe some other Hebrew manuscript? We don't know, but he's obviously agreeing, at least in principle, with that understanding. It's possible that Paul was referencing the Septuagint, and since the Septuagint was wrong, maybe Paul, since he wasn't making a chronological point, maybe he was wrong about the dating, but right about the promise. Maybe that's it. I don't like disagreeing with Paul, so I'm going to take the position of Egypt and Canaan in line with Paul. But I want you to understand that I have many colleagues here at Andrews University, many of our colleagues in the Institute of Archaeology here, who believe that 430 years was all in Egypt. I differ from them. I think it was Egypt and Canaan, and I think Paul is correct. And let me show you why. Let me show you how to understand. By the way, Siegfried Horn, who was the father of Adventist archaeology, he also believed Egypt and Canaan for 430 years, which means they were only in Egypt for about 215 years. This is how we would understand the statement of Genesis and Acts regarding the 400 years of affliction. So if the 430 years was in Egypt and Canaan, this is how you'd understand these two. 400 years in this case is not a rounded form of 430, but they're actually two different events that both end at the Exodus in 1447, for example, both end at the Exodus. The sojourn began with Abraham when he left Ur in 1877. We saw that date already. That's Abraham leaving Ur. And then 30 years later, at the weaning party for Isaac, Isaac's brother, if we were all together, I would ask you this, but I don't, I know you probably know the answer. That Isaac's brother, older brother Ishmael, he was half he was half Abraham's son and half whose son? Of course, I know you're shouting it from behind the screens, and it's Hagar, of course. And who was Hagar? What nationality? She was Egyptian, of course. And so at that point, perhaps, is when the Egyptian affliction began for the descendants of Abraham. And that 440 years began with that event and lasted until, of course, the Exodus event when the Egyptians no longer afflicted the Hebrews any longer. So that's how that would be understood, those two events. And that you kind of see this right here. So, and it's one other point. If you go back to Genesis 15 and go to verse 16, God continues. He says, but in the fourth generation, they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. 4 generations only in Egypt. Is that true? Did that happen? That would suggest a shorter amount of time in Egypt, of course. 4 generations in Genesis 15. If you look at Exodus 6, Moses writing about his own family tree, he says that Levi was the father of Kohath. Of course, we know Levi was born in Canaan, of course, up with Laban during that time period. Kohath was Levi's son. He had 3 sons. One was named Kohath, and he was also born in Canaan. We know he was born in Canaan because he's listed among those who came from Canaan with Jacob to Egypt. He was one of those 70 people who came. There's more than 70 if you count some of the wives, but 70 people who came. And then Amram was Kohath's son. We know he was born in Egypt because he wasn't among those who came in. Amram's son was Aaron and Moses and Miriam, of course. Miriam and then Moses. Miriam was probably the eldest one. Aaron was his son. Aaron's son was Eleazar. He had 4 sons, of course. Eleazar is the one mentioned who had a son named Phinehas. Phinehas becomes an important priest later on in Hebrew history. But Phinehas was also born before the Exodus. That means 4 generations born in Egypt. It seems to suggest that Moses himself was writing with the assumption that that 4 generations, the shorter sojourn in Egypt, is probably correct. Probably 430 years from Abraham to the Exodus event, or to Sinai Exodus event. By the way, if you were to take the years, the dates of the years of these fellows that were lived and died, you add them up, they don't even equal 430 years. It's 300 and something. So either Moses was really bad at math, or Moses himself didn't believe they were there for 430 years. So that's my understanding. There's other ways of explaining this, but that's how I understand it. And what I get from that is that God is on time. You know, I know we as Adventists, we focus very much on the second advent. That's the whole, it's part of our name. It's part of what we're excited about, finishing the gospel commission so Jesus can come. We're very, very excited about that. But we need to remember that God's on time. He's not delaying. He's on time, and he'll come right on time, just like he did the first time when Jesus came, the first time on time. Well, taking this understanding, which is the understanding that I have, this is the Egypt and Canaan variant. These are the dates for the different some different events. So you can see the sojourn beginning in 1877. I've highlighted in yellow. You can see the affliction beginning 30 years later. We talked about that a minute ago. Joseph would have been born about 1699. And then Israel came into Egypt in 1660 during those after the 2 years of famine. And you know the story. So that's kind of when they came into Egypt, which means they were only in Egypt about 215 years or so before they left. As a result of this, there's 3 theories, and these 3 theories we're going to talk about every night. We're not going to talk about them in detail anymore, but I'll reference them again. So if you want to take a picture of the screen, or for your own, or just remember when we come back, let me explain the screen to you so you can kind of understand it, for why it's important. 430 years all in Egypt is this column here. So some of my colleagues here at Andrews are in this column. 430 years in Egypt and Canaan. So that's myself at Siegfried Horn. We were in this column here. Both of us, by the way, treat 1 Kings 6:1 literally, which means the 480 years between time of Solomon is literal amount. Then this 3rd column is where my colleagues at Lipscomb are at, and other very good Christian scholars who believe that 1 Kings 6:1 is symbolic, as they push it back to the 19th dynasty for the Exodus. And they think the 430 years was all in Egypt as well. There isn't, as far as I know, there's not a 4th theory. So there's not a 4th position, that has the 430 years all in Egypt and Canaan and symbolic. I don't know of that one, so I don't have it up here. These are the only 3 that I really know of. What's really good about this is that we know that no matter when the Exodus was, whether it was 18th or 19th dynasties, it happened during the New Kingdom. Everybody agrees on that, and that makes it very easy to talk about. We also know that if it's 430 years all in Egypt and Canaan, literal, or 430 years all in Egypt and symbolic, then the Hebrews came into Egypt in the second intermediate period. Talk about that more tomorrow night, specifically. If it was 430 years all in Egypt and literal, then this position here, some of my colleagues at Andrews pushed back Joseph to the Middle Kingdom. And that's why I said that earlier when I was talking Joseph and Middle Kingdom. It's a possibility. In this one where I'm at, the middle one, Abraham would be the Middle Kingdom, Joseph would be the second intermediate, and Moses in the New Kingdom. Just so you know where I'm at. I want to be very transparent so you know where I'm at, what I'm talking about. Okay, so when were the Hebrews in Egypt? I believe they came into the second intermediate period, and I'll give you some evidence for that over the next couple nights. When we talk about the route of the Exodus, particularly, I'll come back to this topic. And I believe they left early in the New Kingdom during the 18th dynasty in 1447. So I think this is when they were in Egypt, with the possibility that they were a little bit later, and possibility coming in a little bit earlier. By the way, over here on the side screen here, you're always going to see those, the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. I put these here for your reference so you kind of can see what I'm talking about on the screen. If you kind of keep track, because I know it's an awful lot, and it'll get a lot easier as we go the next couple of nights. It'll be much, much easier. This is the hardest, probably the hardest night is tonight. Genesis 50, 24 to 25. I no matter when they were in Egypt, I'm going to go back one slide. I want to show you one more thing, 2 slides, 3 slides. No matter when they came in. So you see this here, Middle Kingdom, Second Intermediate period is here, and New Kingdom. They were, no matter when they came in, they all were in Egypt, the Second Intermediate period. And I know that wherever Joseph was, when he died, this is what he said. He said to his brother, and I am dying, is the last thing said in Genesis. I am dying, but God will surely visit you. And when he brings you out of this land, to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you. He said it a second time. And you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died being 110 years old. They embalmed him. They made him a mummy, and they put him in a coffin in Egypt. He said twice, God will surely visit you. And as Adventists, I know it's important for us to know that too. I don't know how long God's going to come. If Jesus is going to come in 2 years or 20, I don't know what it is. It could be longer, it could be shorter, whatever it is. He did promise he was coming, and he kept his promise to them. He's going to keep his promise to us. God will surely visit us. And by the way, he visited them while they were in Egypt. He didn't leave them in there by alone. He won't leave us today alone either. Did Israel build the pyramids? I don't think so. I don't think so. With one caveat. If they came in during the Second Intermediate period and left in the New Kingdom as the second position and the third position maintained, then no, because the pyramids were all built before that. But if they came in during the Middle Kingdom, it's possible they might have. So there's always a possibility. They didn't build the big ones at Giza. That was the Old Kingdom. They definitely didn't build those. They may have had a hand in building some of the brickwork for the pyramids in the Middle Kingdom, possibly. So who built the big pyramids at Giza? Well, Herodotus, who's a Greek, this is a Roman bust, by the way, a copy of a Greek bust. He was a historian. He wrote in his second book of histories that meaning Khufu, then bade all the Egyptians work for him. Of this oppression, there passed 10 years for the foundation work. You saw those interlocking limestone foundation work. For the making of the pyramid itself, there passed a period of 20 years. So Herodotus claims from the Greek period, he claims that actually it was the Egyptians themselves. Well, archaeologists at the Giza Plateau, under the direction of Mark Lerner and others, Mark Lerner is the expert about Giza Plateau. They discovered actually the tombs of the pyramid builders. They found the cities, the villages. It's the foundations of the walls. The walls are all long gone, but the foundation of the village of the pyramid builders, and they were Egyptian. The slaves did not build the big pyramids at Giza. And now, because of the discovery of the pyramid scroll found in near the Red Sea, we now know for certain it was the Egyptians. We know that they actually worked in groups. It was very much kind of a quarrying team, only quarried. And then there's a team that transported the quarried stones to the river. That's all they did. It was like an assembly line. And then another team put them onto the ships. Another team sailed them downriver to the Giza Plateau. Another team unloaded them. Another team transported them to the pyramids. Another team put them up. And so how they actually put them up on the pyramids, we don't know. Herodotus said it took them 20 years to do it. That would have been very efficient. But remember those granite stones in the burial chamber, how precise they were. This was a tremendous work. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, yet it was so precise. They were very, very intelligent people. So however they actually got the blocks up on, we know Egyptians did it, and we know that they did it in teams of work. In fact, there's a graffiti in the Great Pyramid right here. This is the name of Khufu right here. And this right here, it says Friends of Khufu Gang. So that the team that actually put this there, wrote graffiti, they consider themselves friends of Khufu, the king. In fact, they were oppressed, but they all believed that they owed the king Bak. Bak is an Egyptian word meaning a life debt. Because the king was a god on earth who gave them a chance to live, they owed their life to him. And so if he wanted a pyramid built, they were going to build a pyramid. And that's what they owed to him for just their life in general. It might be a lesson there in how we treat God. If God really is our ruler, our God, really, we owe him a life debt. And maybe we shouldn't forget that too easily when he asks us to do things for him. One more thing I'll do before I open up for questions. 2016 presidential campaign. I think Ben Carson was one of the candidates. Ben Carson is an Adventist surgeon. He actually worked for the Trump administration. I think he did a pretty good job. I love Ben Carson, but Ben Carson was not an Egyptian archaeologist. And at one point, he suggested that maybe the pyramids were used to store grain. That's not at all true. The pyramids were definitely used as burial chambers. We know because the sarcophagus is still there. We have the pyramid text. We know what they were used for. Grain was actually stored in silos like this. This is from the time of Ramesseum, the 19th dynasty. But they actually were built out of mud brick, and the big jars had grain in them. They were sealed, and then they were stacked and sealed in this kind of it's not plastered anymore. The plaster has fallen off. These plastered kind of silos and sealed up so that the rats and critters wouldn't get in and eat it. That's how grain was stored in those kind of silos. So we know how grain was stored. But I'll put that up there just because there's always a lot of questions about that. So kind of can skip that part. But if somebody has a question on that, we can answer that question. So if under my understanding, I don't think the Hebrews built the pyramids. I wonder if the Hebrews had a chance to see the pyramids. That would depend on where they lived. So if you come back tomorrow night, we'll talk about where the Hebrews lived in Egypt. And I'll open it up now to for questions.
All right. Again, if you have questions and you don't want to be speaking, go ahead and type it out on the chat line. Yeah, I know for me, this is kind of a series, isn't it, Doctor? And so this is sort of the overview, and then you're going to give us little bits and pieces later on. So are there any questions? So let me start it out then. No, Saqqara is Memphis, right? It's the same thing.
It's close by. It's not too far away.
Right.
There's
so
different sites, but they're close.
Okay. So because I think we have a group going there, and so when people tell me we're going to Saqqara or Memphis, I always think they're the same thing, but they're not on different. They're not on different. What is that again? Compounds?
They are different sites. Saqqara is completely in the desert in the west, and Memphis is actually in the Nile Valley there, kind of the Delta area right there.
Right.
It's actually a little ways away. It doesn't take very long, 20 minutes, whatever, to get between one and the other, but they're pretty close.
Okay.
So just as we get ready to have questions, let me just tonight is the date of the Exodus. Tomorrow is geography. Where they live, and then the third night is going to be the.
Hang on, can you hang on, Dr. Baker? I think Mr. Maldonado, there's a TV on.
Oh, hold on. Sorry, I was getting ready for a question here.
Right, and there's just so much feedback that we couldn't hear anything. So go ahead and finish your thought, Dr. Baker, and then we'll go to Mr. Maldonado.
So on so tomorrow night we'll do where they lived, and then on Tuesday night who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. On Wednesday night we'll do the plagues of Egypt. Thursday will be the route of the Exodus, and Friday night we'll talk a little bit about the wilderness sanctuary that was built and the Egyptian connection to that.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Maldonado.
No, I just had a quick question here related to whether or not they participated in the building of the pyramids, because the Bible said that one of the ways that they were oppressed was by building mud bricks. So whatever they were used to produce massive construction. But at the same time, at least my personal understanding is that when they were given the land to Joseph's descendants, they were primarily settled around the Delta area, which was the area that was rich in, agriculture more than anything. So, how do you match the construction that they were supposed to be engaging, and at that level that involved everybody with exactly what they dedicated time to build?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, we're talking about that very topic tomorrow night. And so I'll get into that in a lot of detail tomorrow night, but just briefly to answer the question, the Exodus 1:11 says they were building 2 supply cities. I'll explain what that was. By the way, one of the greatest achievements, I guess, of the archaeological method is that we actually know where Pithom and Ramses are, the 2 supply cities. It's 99% sure. I think it's basically 100% sure we know where those 2 sites are. We found the names, we found everything. So there's no real question about where they were building those. And so I'll show you that tomorrow night. The pyramids were all built off into on the west. And so there's a little bit of difficulties with them building mud bricks for pyramids. Some of my colleagues suggest that they were in Egypt during the time of the Middle Kingdom. There were pyramids built in the Middle Kingdom, but they were built a little bit further to the south. I'll show you that map tomorrow. It'll make a lot more sense tomorrow. It's possible they could have done that, but that would mean they had to have been in slavery at that time, and they weren't in slavery during the time of Joseph. So there's a little bit of problems with that theory. So that's why I'm pretty confident the Hebrews did not build pyramids. Even if they did come into the Middle Kingdom, I don't think they built pyramids. So tomorrow night, it'll be very clear. And so if I don't answer the question better tomorrow night, please ask it again, and I'll see if we can do a better job.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm glad you had a question. It says, I just saw a documentary about Saqqara Pyramid. If these pyramids are built on sand and covered completely by sand for thousands of years, how do they not shift through the years?
It's a really good question. They actually they're not built on sand. They're actually built on bedrock. So they dig down to the bedrock. But the sand in Egypt it's always been a problem. I think the Sphinx has been covered at least 3 times that we know of in the ancient times. And of course, during the time of Napoleon, it was also covered again. So the sand just is always encroaching. It's a problem still today. By the way, if you go to Egypt today, it's remarkable what the modern government is doing. I am very much supportive of the modern government. They're actually building a brand new Cairo. It's called New Cairo. It's a new capital, and they're going to move everybody away from Old Cairo out into the desert because they realize that the water table goes it's all through the desert on both sides. And so as you come in from the Suez Canal from Sinai, if you get a chance to go see Mount Sinai and come through the Suez Canal going to Cairo, heading west, you'll travel miles and miles and miles where there's brand new condominiums, apartment buildings up as far as you can see before you, as far as you can see behind you. And if you look down the streets, as far as you can see down on both sides, it's amazing what they're doing. They're trying to do this and relocate the population out away from the Nile River because there's plenty of water just under the sand. So that sand has always been encroaching, but the pyramids themselves were actually built on bedrock. That's why they haven't shifted yet.
Now, you mentioned that granite came from Aswan. Is that the only place granite is? And that's why, because that's a long ways from Aswan to Cairo. And if they're building the foundation of that, that's a lot of trips. And I'm not even sure how boats can stay afloat with those huge granite blocks. But is that the only place where granite is?
Yeah, that's good. No, granite's found other places as well, but the geologists have a way of telling where stone comes from, and so there were granite quarries at Aswan, and it's been confirmed that is where those granite blocks came from. And so, but you're right, it's a long distance, and those boats were very, very big. We do have some illustrations of them moving blocks at later time periods. And so we know that they did use those big boats to move it. In fact, there was a big boat, a couple of boats buried near the big pyramid, Khufu's pyramid. So I think finally are opening the Egyptian Grand Museum after many, many years of promising. And that big boat that used to be on the south side of Khufu's pyramid is now in the Grand Museum. So you get a chance to see it. If you get a chance to go there, I hope you get a chance to see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they did travel them, and they're very big and very heavy.
Yeah. So it's that boat that took the
I don't know if that was the boat. I think that was
Okay.
that's more of a boat for him to travel on, but they
Yeah,
had
yeah. Okay.
large boats.
Wow, wow. Uh, anybody else? I have a few more questions. But anybody
By
else?
the way, on that one by that point,
Uh-huh.
they only transported blocks during certain periods of time when the water level was very high. So that kind of maybe that helps out a little bit more to make it a little bit
Right,
better.
right. Anybody else? Can you give us a little bit of history on why pyramids? Why
Yeah.
would why would anybody spend so much time and energy building these things? And I'm guessing, did every pharaoh build this?
And good, that's good. Actually, it's if you go around the world, you'll find pyramids in a lot of ancient cultures. It's
Mm,
what some scholars call it's called menumo history. It's the history that's remembered, the memory of history, and you see it in different civilizations. That means they all had a common origin, and so a lot of thought has been gone into this. The Egyptians themselves consider it the mound of creation. I have a personal theory. This
mm,
don't you don't need to believe this one, but I'll tell you it anyway because it's kind of fun. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, that the original mound of creation is there. The Egyptians considered that what we would call the Garden of Eden, and you read in Genesis 2, it talks about four rivers, the
mm,
rivers that split in the Garden of Eden and went to water the whole earth.
right.
Obviously, the Garden of Eden has to be a higher level than everything else if the water is going to travel from there to the rest of the earth. And
Mm,
there's four sides to a pyramid. I don't know if that's conclusive evidence of anything, but it is quite possible that that Garden of Eden thought that that mound, that hill or mountain or whatever that Garden of Eden, whatever it looked like, was remembered past the flood. And so when they started thinking about a place to go worship, they thought about a mound of creation, the Garden of Eden, basically. As far as we understand, the antediluvians who worship God worshipped at the gate of the garden. And so we know that the pyramids were sacred mounds. They were meant to be the mountains
mm.
of for that creation. And so that's why they believed that when they were buried inside of it, they would live forever in that kind of protected space, and they'd be able to have an afterlife. We'll talk more about the afterlife later. But one more part of that is if you go to Revelation and 21 and you're reading about the New Jerusalem, it's
Mm,
the same length as it is width as it is height. You know,
mm,
and we oftentimes consider that to be a cube. But if you read a little closer, you'll read that the wall of the city is not the same height as the height of the city. There's only one other shape that has the same length, width, and height besides a cube, and that's a pyramid. And I wonder if the New Jerusalem isn't Garden of Eden creation all over again. And it's a mound, it's a city that's going to be where God dwells. Certainly in Revelation 20, when he appears above the city on his throne and judges the wicked for the last time after the millennium's over, a pyramid shape would be much easier for everybody to see him than a cube. So I believe a pyramid is a possibility for that, but I do think the Garden of Eden is probably where this idea probably comes from.
awesome. Thank you. Mr. Maldonado, do you have another question?
Yeah, I read some years ago that there is some theories indicating that the pyramids are aligned towards Orion. For us, Orion has bigger significance. Is there any truth about that, or have you read, studied anything that
I have actually.
indicates that?
I think there is truth to that. I think the Egyptians were very much in tune with the stars. They seem to have some memory of angels or something else, travelers. They considered the gods to live in the stars, and the stars were the gods themselves. And so the pyramids do seem to have from the top looking down this idea. You'd have to look at them from the top down to see the Orion's belt kind of shape. They are lined up that way, but whether it's not been proved conclusively one way or the other. But I have seen documentaries. I don't have any problem believing that because the Egyptians were very much astronomical, so it is possible.
Thank you. I also have a question. You were mentioning how the Old Kingdom uh, I I I know that Upper and Lower Egypt used to be two different kingdoms. Was so my question would be, was there two separate pharaohs at one time during the Old Kingdom where Egypt was divided, or maybe they were even two separate countries, or they were against each other, kind of like northern and southern Israel? And I know there was talk in history about this two kingdoms being united. Do you kind of know when that is, and were the Israelites already in Egypt when this united this unity came, or were they there when there was still an upper and lower kingdom?
Yeah. So okay. So if you remember back to the different kingdoms, Old, Middle, and New Kingdom,
Hmm.
those are heights of civilization when there was just one king who ruled
I
all of
see.
Egypt.
Okay.
In fact, the first dynasty was also a time when they ruled all of Egypt. It looks like Narmer, angry catfish guy, was probably the first one to do that unification. But the
Mhm.
times of the intermediate periods, there was multiple kings ruling. And so if the Hebrews came into Egypt, as I think they did during the second intermediate period, that would have been two kings ruling at the same time. And tomorrow night, I'm going to tell you a story about that time period, a story that happened in Egypt with these two different rulers at the same time. And the Hebrews would have been in Egypt when that story happened. So I'll tell you this historical story tomorrow night, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so they were definitely in Egypt, whether they came at that time or they came before. They were in Egypt during that time of chaos, second intermediate period. But back at the New Kingdom, again, one ruler over all of Egypt.
Okay. Okay. So I'm sure I'll ask my other questions tomorrow
Okay,
then.
sure. Okay.
That's awesome. Anybody else have any other questions? Go ahead, Don.
I have a question. Do pyramids have an entrance, or are they concealed entrance?
They were concealed entrances. They do have a single entrance, and Khufu's is up the side of his pyramid. The second one, this one right here, this big one right here, this actually is a little bit smaller than Khufu's pyramid. It's his son that built it, Khafre. But Khafre was smart. He built it on a higher bedrock, so it looks bigger than his dad's. But his entrance is actually dug into the bedrock. It's not even in the pyramid itself, so it's actually underneath. So they did have one entrance, and then they had that casing. You see a little bit of the casing of Khufu's pyramid is still, Khafre's pyramid is still there. All of them used to have that casing, and that casing we understand was very much concealed where the entrance would have been.
Okay, we were in some pyramids in Memphis, and I don't remember we went in, but I don't remember asking if it was a concealed entrance originally. But
I
I
think
can see
all of them were meant to be concealed. Yeah.
Sure.
Now, most of them had temples. So they have valley temples near the Nile, where they have mortuary people come and worship and do different things to keep the cult of that god, living. And so people would go there, but they wouldn't actually go to the pyramids to go inside them.
Sure. Thank you.
Unless you're robbing them, then you would happen to go inside.
All right,
I
Mr.
have a question
Maldonado.
about the timetable. When you were talking about the timetable, isn't it possible that when we try to assess a timetable from the archaeological point of view, some of the discrepancies are due to the geopolitical realities in the Middle East? That if the Exodus happened, actually, then the Bible takes too much credence among non-Christians, and actually the current state of Israel, then it comes clearly as instituted by God.
You'll hear me, and you'll hear a lot of other archaeologists use the word Hebrews rather than Israel, and that's the reason why. It's not that we don't believe, obviously, Israel. Jacob's name was Israel. They were called the children of Israel, but because there's a modern country called Israel, we don't refer to them as Israelis. We refer to them as Hebrews, and that kind of helps with that because there is a lot of tension. Egypt is very friendly towards Israel right now, but they're not. Israel is very careful about the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are very careful about the Hebrews. The Israelis. So it's kind of a, it's a little tenuous, but it's a peace right now. Jordan is at peace with Israel right now. A couple other countries are as well. They're trying to get more peace with them. So we try very much to talk about the southern Levant rather than Israel, or we'll say Palestine rather than Israel, not because we don't support Israel. I support Israel. I support everybody in the Middle East. I'm not against anybody. But I understand the tensions are high. And so, yes, there is a lot of effort to downplay anything to do with the Bible, but I think it's primarily to do with God, the downplaying. But those who believe in God sometimes still want to downplay it a bit because it does help them to be able to get their permits to dig and do different things if they are not promoting the modern country of Israel. And some, some Christians are very pro-modern Israel, and that causes some troubles.
Yeah, understood. And they are going to capitalize on it if they can.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it looks like that is it for questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Baker. Why don't you go ahead with your book?
Yeah, so I just put the screen up here right now. I'll put it up at the other nights as well. Not encouraging anybody to buy it if you're happy to buy it if you want. Years ago, someone, this is 2015 is when this came out. It's a novel. If you like to read a story about the Exodus, it takes the Exodus, the Bible, and Ellen White and puts it all together. It actually fits together perfectly. The Exodus story, I wrote this story. I didn't write it for Adventists. I didn't write it for Christians even. I wrote it for my secular colleagues to read. So it takes it. It's very real. It's not for kids. It's definitely for adults. The Egyptians were well. If we want to understand where God took His people out of, we have to understand the world of the Egyptians, and it wasn't a sanitary Sabbath school type, children's Sabbath school type world. It was a very adult world, and the Egyptians were doing things when the Hebrews came. When Joseph and Moses came in, we know who the Pharaoh was. I think we know who the Pharaoh was. We know what he was planning. We'll talk about that on Tuesday night. And we know what he was doing. So I put all that into the story. And I titled it Land of Ramses, because that's the land they were living in. Talk about that tomorrow night. It's available at Amazon. It's available also at Westbow Press. Westbow Press is a subsidiary of Thomas Nelson and Zondervan. Thomas Nelson does the New King James and Zondervan does the NIV, but they're all owned by HarperCollins. Westbow is also owned by HarperCollins as a subsidiary of the other two. So anyway, I wrote the novel some years ago, and if you're interested in getting it, I'm happy for you to do that. If you like to read historical, biblical, mystery kind of novels, that's a good one.
All right, thank you. And so again, if you enjoyed tonight, I know you will enjoy every night. So we're going to be back tomorrow night, same time at 6:30, same format. And again, I would like to thank Dr. Baker for his topic and the way he presented tonight. So before we end, if you wouldn't mind, let's bow our heads and thank God for our experience today. Gracious God, again, I thank you for Dr. Baker and for his work. I thank you, Lord, for everything that we learned today. And it's so neat that with all the things that we're hearing about, whether the Exodus really happened and whether the Hebrews were there or not, I thank you that you've given us some insight. And so I pray that you would be with Dr. Baker as he presents again tomorrow. I ask, Lord, that you would be with those who are contemplating on coming. And we pray that, again, as we listen to your word, that we would have confidence on what you're doing in the world today and what you're doing in our lives. Thank you for answering this prayer, because we ask it all in thy holy, wonderful name. Amen. All right, just one more thing. This recording is going to be on our YouTube page. So I don't know exactly when I'll be able to upload it, but it will be there for any of you who would want to see it again. I know for me, I will watch it again, even though I was taking screenshots. I know it can be a lot, but it's going to be there for any one of you to watch. If you want to get the exact, what is that again? The exact link, just email us. For those of you who actually gotten your invitation through Facebook, just you can actually you can actually message us through our Facebook page. So thank you and good night, and hope to see you all tomorrow night. God bless.
Night.